He wasn't trained to bite luggage, but that morning, under the cold white lights of Terminal C, he refused to let go. The sound came first, a sharp scrape against polished tile, the kind that makes heads turn without knowing why, followed by a low, steady growl that didn't belong in a place filled with rolling suitcases and distant boarding calls. Rex's jaws were locked onto a black hardshell suitcase, his teeth gripping the edge with a precision that wasn't panic, wasn't aggression, but something far more deliberate. Around him, travelers slowed, confused, a few stepping back as if instinctively sensing a boundary had been crossed. Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes stood at the other end of the leash, his hand firm but not pulling, his posture still in a way that suggested he wasn't surprised, only alert. Rex didn't bark. He didn't thrash. He held, muscles taut, ears angled forward, amber eyes fixed not on the suitcase, but on something beyond it, something unseen threading through the air like a scent only he could read. Overhead, a boarding announcement echoed, distorted and hollow, calling passengers to Gate 22, but it felt distant now, like the world had stepped a few inches back from itself. Daniel's gaze moved slowly from Rex to the suitcase, then to the man standing a few feet away, the presumed owner. Mid-40s, neatly dressed, pressed navy suit, leather shoes polished enough to reflect the ceiling lights. The man held a boarding pass between his fingers, his expression tight but controlled, the kind of composure that looked rehearsed. "There's nothing in there," he said, voice even, almost too even, as if the sentence had been prepared ahead of time. Daniel didn't respond. He had worked with Rex for 4 years, through heat that shimmered over desert roads and cold mornings where breath hung like smoke in the air. He knew the difference between a false alert and this. This wasn't training. This wasn't protocol. This was instinct breaking through discipline. Rex shifted slightly, tightening his grip, a subtle adjustment, like a lock clicking into place. A TSA officer approached, hesitant at first, then more assertive, hand hovering near the suitcase handle. "Sergeant, you want him to release?" the officer asked, trying to keep his tone neutral, but there was a thread of uncertainty beneath it. Daniel exhaled slowly, eyes never leaving Rex. The dog's chest rose and fell in controlled breaths, steady, deliberate, like he was holding on to more than just plastic and metal. The air carried a mix of scents, coffee from a nearby kiosk, faint jet fuel drifting in from the runway, and beneath it all, something sharper, something out of place. Daniel felt it before he could name it, not as a smell, but as a shift, a quiet wrongness pressing against the edges of the moment. "Not yet," he said finally, voice low. The man in the suit shifted his weight, just an inch, but enough. Enough for Rex's ears to flick, enough for that low growl to deepen, vibrating through the floor like a warning no one else could fully hear. Time stretched. People watched. And in that thin space between routine and rupture, one thing became clear to Daniel Hayes. Rex wasn't making a mistake. He was trying to stop something before it could move any further. Daniel's grip on the leash remained steady, but his mind was already moving, retracing the last 10 minutes with the precision of a man trained to notice what others overlook, the rhythm of their patrol, the spacing between passengers, the subtle shifts in behavior that rarely meant anything until suddenly they did. Rex had been calm, almost bored, pacing beside him with that quiet discipline that came from years of shared work, passing families with overstuffed carry-ons, business travelers glued to their phones, the occasional nervous flyer checking departure boards like they might change if stared at long enough. Nothing had stood out. Not until the moment Rex slowed. It had not been abrupt, not a dramatic stop, just a slight hesitation, a change in cadence that Daniel felt through the leash before he even saw it. Rex's head tilted a fraction, nostrils flaring once, twice. Then his entire posture shifted, like a compass needle snapping toward true north. Daniel had followed his line of sight back then and saw only a man rolling a suitcase, blending perfectly into the flow of foot traffic. No rush, no panic, no obvious tells. Just another traveler heading somewhere. "You catch something, partner?" Daniel had murmured under his breath, more habit than question, because Rex did not need words to answer. The dog had not barked. He had not sat, the standard alert for explosives, nor had he pawed, the signal for narcotics. Instead, he moved forward with a quiet certainty that made Daniel's chest tighten in a way he could not explain. It was not in the training manual. It was not something instructors could simulate. It was something that lived between instinct and memory, built over missions where the margin for error was measured in seconds. Back in the present, the suitcase scraped again as Rex adjusted his stance, refusing to yield even an inch. The man in the suit let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but it lacked warmth. "This is ridiculous," he said, louder now, drawing more attention, as if volume alone could restore normalcy. A few people nearby paused completely, phones half-raised, unsure whether to record or retreat. The TSA officer glanced at Daniel again, waiting for a command that would bring this moment back into the boundaries of procedure. Daniel's eyes dropped briefly to Rex's shoulders, noting the tension there, not frantic, not uncontrolled, but focused, like a coiled spring held in place by purpose alone. He remembered a night years ago, a roadside stop in a place where the air smelled of dust and diesel, when Rex had done something similar, refusing to move forward despite a clear path, and minutes later they had learned why. That memory did not come with images of chaos or fear, only the quiet realization that sometimes the dog knew before the world did. Daniel looked up again, meeting the man's eyes this time. There was something there, not guilt in the obvious sense, not the kind that made people sweat or stammer, but a flicker, a calculation happening just beneath the surface. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Enough for Daniel to feel that same shift in the air, that same wrongness pressing closer now. Rex's growl deepened, low and steady, a sound that did not ask for attention but demanded it. And in that moment, Daniel understood something with complete clarity. Whatever was inside that suitcase, Rex was not reacting to an object. He was reacting to a truth, trying to stay hidden. The fluorescent lights above seemed harsher now, casting sharp reflections across the suitcase's surface as if trying to reveal something hidden beneath its clean exterior, but it remained closed, silent, ordinary to everyone except the one creature refusing to let it pass. Daniel shifted his stance slightly, placing himself between the man and Rex, not aggressively, not yet, but enough to establish a boundary that did not need to be spoken. The TSA officer swallowed and adjusted his gloves, glancing at the small crowd forming at a careful distance, the quiet ripple of unease spreading faster than any announcement could contain. "Sir, I am going to need you to step back while we assess this," the officer said, voice measured but firmer now. The man hesitated, just a fraction too long, then took a slow step back, hands raised slightly in a gesture meant to signal compliance, but his eyes never left the suitcase. Daniel noticed that. Not the movement, but the focus. Most people, when stopped, looked at the officer, at the dog, at anything that might explain the disruption. This man watched the suitcase like it mattered more than anything else in the terminal. Rex's ears twitched again, his body lowering just a touch, weight shifting forward as if bracing against something unseen, his growl soft but constant, like a warning held under control. Daniel crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to Rex's level, his voice low, steady, the same tone he had used in training fields and tense moments alike. "Easy, partner," he murmured, not as a command to release, but as reassurance that he was being heard. Rex did not loosen his grip, but his eyes flicked briefly toward Daniel, a quick check, a confirmation, then back to the suitcase, unwavering. That look settled something inside Daniel. This was not confusion. This was certainty. The officer nodded toward another agent who had just arrived, and together they moved closer, one reaching carefully for the suitcase handle while keeping a respectful distance from Rex's jaws. "We are going to open it right here," the officer announced, more for the growing audience than for the people directly involved. The man in the suit inhaled slowly, his chest rising, then falling, and for the first time, a crack appeared in his composure, not dramatic, not obvious, but there in the tightening of his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes. "You are making a mistake," he said, quieter now, almost as if the words were meant only for Daniel. Daniel met his gaze without blinking. "Maybe," he replied, voice calm. "But we do not ignore a K9 alert." The latch clicked. It was a small sound, barely audible over the hum of the terminal, but in that moment it felt amplified, like a line being crossed. Rex's growl stopped, not because the tension was gone, but because something had shifted. His body went still, completely still, as if he was listening to something deeper than sound. The lid began to lift, inch by inch, slow enough that every second stretched, every breath around them held. Daniel felt it again, that subtle pressure in the air, the sense that whatever was inside was not meant to be found so easily. The officer paused halfway, glancing at Daniel, then at Rex, as if silently asking permission to continue. Daniel gave a single nod. The lid opened further, revealing the interior, neat at first glance, too neat, layers arranged with a precision that did not match the casual claim of clothes and travel. And then the scent changed. It was faint, almost lost beneath the sterile smell of plastic and fabric. But it was there, something unfamiliar, something that did not belong in a suitcase meant for a simple trip. Rex lowered his head slightly, no longer pulling, no longer resisting, just watching, as if his job was not to act anymore, but to witness what came next. For a moment, nothing happened, and that silence carried more weight than any alarm ever could, as if the entire terminal had drawn a quiet breath and forgotten how to release it. The officer lifted the top layer inside the suitcase with careful hands, revealing folded garments beneath, shirts pressed flat, colors neutral, nothing that would raise suspicion at first glance. Yet something about the arrangement felt deliberate, almost staged, like a scene prepared for inspection rather than a traveler packing in haste. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, not searching for something obvious, but for what did not belong, the subtle inconsistencies that often told a deeper story. Rex remained still now, no longer pulling, no longer growling, his role complete in a way only he seemed to understand, his gaze fixed on the opening, as if waiting for the truth to surface on its own. The officer peeled back another layer, slower this time, and that was when it became clear that the suitcase was not filled the way most were. Beneath the clothes sat a sealed compartment, thinner than expected, hidden within the structure itself, its edges almost invisible unless you knew where to look. "Sir, step further back," the officer said again, this time with more authority, his voice carrying a quiet urgency that shifted the mood from confusion to concern. The man in the suit complied, but his posture changed, shoulders tightening, hands lowering slightly, not in defiance, but in a way that suggested he was no longer trying to appear relaxed. Daniel noticed the shift immediately. It was small, but it was enough. Enough to confirm that whatever was about to be uncovered was not a misunderstanding. The officer traced the edge of the compartment with his gloved fingers, finding the seam, then paused, glancing once more at Daniel, who gave a slight nod. The latch inside clicked, softer than before, almost reluctant, and the panel lifted to reveal what had been carefully concealed beneath. It was not chaos. It was not something explosive or immediately dangerous. It was organized, contained, and that made it more unsettling. Inside were several sealed packages, each identical in size, each wrapped with precision, labeled in a way that did not match any standard travel marking, codes instead of names, numbers instead of destinations. The air shifted again, not physically, but perceptibly, as the weight of realization began to settle over those close enough to see. One of the officers leaned in slightly, examining without touching his expression tightening as he recognized something that did not belong in civilian travel. "This is not standard," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Daniel's gaze moved from the contents to the man, who now stood very still, his earlier composure replaced by a silence that felt heavier than any protest. Rex lowered his head further, resting his chin just above the edge of the suitcase, not touching, just close enough to sense what lay within, his breathing slow and steady, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. Daniel crouched beside him again, one hand resting lightly against the dog's shoulder, feeling the calm there, the certainty that had led them here. Around them, the terminal noise began to return in fragments, distant voices, rolling wheels, the world slowly remembering how to move again, but the space around the suitcase remained suspended, untouched by the normal flow. And in that quiet center, Daniel understood something deeper than protocol, deeper than training. Rex had not reacted to fear. He had not reacted to noise or movement. He had followed something invisible, something human, something hidden with intention. And now, piece by piece, that intention was beginning to reveal itself. The officer did not touch the packages right away, and that hesitation spoke louder than any immediate reaction could have, because it meant recognition without confirmation, the kind of moment where training meets something unexpected and pauses just long enough to understand what it is seeing. Daniel rose slowly to his full height, his hand still resting lightly on Rex, grounding himself in the steady presence beside him as his eyes moved over the contents again, taking in the uniformity, the precision, the quiet intention behind every detail. These were not items packed in a hurry. They were placed with purpose. The second officer leaned closer, careful, controlled, his voice lowered as he spoke to his partner. "We need secondary inspection," he said, not loud enough for the crowd, but firm enough to shift the atmosphere completely. The words carried weight. Not suspicion anymore. Procedure had changed. Around them, the subtle line between routine screening and something more serious became visible in the way other staff began to reposition, in the way radios were adjusted, in the way space was quietly cleared without causing alarm. The man in the suit exhaled slowly, his composure no longer polished, just contained. "This is unnecessary," he said, but the certainty was gone from his voice now, replaced by something thinner, something that did not reach his eyes. Daniel studied him carefully, not searching for guilt, but for the absence of innocence, the small fractures that appear when control begins to slip. "Sir, please keep your hands visible," the officer instructed, stepping slightly to the side to maintain a clear line between the man and the suitcase. Rex did not move. He remained where he was, head low, eyes steady, as if he had already moved beyond the moment of action and into something quieter, something that required patience rather than force. Daniel crouched again briefly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Good work," he said, not as praise, but as acknowledgement, the kind that passes between partners who understand each other without needing explanation. Rex's ear flicked once in response, nothing more, but it was enough. One of the officers carefully lifted one of the sealed packages, holding it up just slightly, examining the wrapping, the markings, the weight. It was too uniform, too consistent. He turned it in his hand, then glanced back at his partner, and something unspoken passed between them. This was no longer a question of what it might be. It was a question of how far it went. The suitcase, once ordinary, now felt like a doorway, something that led beyond itself into a larger story waiting just out of sight. Daniel felt that shift again, deeper this time, not just in the air, but in the way the moment settled into something irreversible. Whatever had been hidden was no longer hidden, and whatever came next would not end here. The man's eyes moved, not toward the officers, not toward the crowd, but toward the terminal exit, just for a fraction of a second, and Daniel caught it. That instinctive glance, that silent calculation of distance and possibility, confirmed everything Rex had already known. "Stay where you are," Daniel said calmly, his voice firm without raising in volume, a tone that carried authority without needing force. The man froze, not out of obedience, but out of realization. The edges of the situation had closed around him. There was no simple explanation left to offer, no casual dismissal that would return things to normal. Around them, the hum of the terminal continued, but it felt distant now, like a separate world that had nothing to do with what was unfolding here. And at the center of it all, Rex remained still, breathing slow, eyes clear, as if the truth he had sensed from the beginning had finally stepped into the light, not with noise, not with chaos, but with a quiet certainty that could not be undone. The call came in quietly over the radio, a coded request that most travelers would never recognize. But to those trained to hear it, it carried a clear message that the situation had moved beyond routine control. Within seconds, 2 additional officers approached from opposite directions, their movements calm, deliberate, blending into the environment without drawing unnecessary attention. Yet their presence shifted the balance completely. The man in the suit noticed it too, his eyes flicking from one officer to the next, calculating, measuring, searching for a gap that no longer existed. Daniel remained where he was, one hand steady on Rex, the other relaxed at his side, his posture neither aggressive nor passive, simply certain. "Sir, we are going to ask you to step with us for further screening," one of the officers said, his tone professional, leaving no room for negotiation. The man hesitated again, and this time the hesitation lingered just long enough to reveal the truth beneath it. Not panic, not fear, but the realization that control had slipped beyond his reach. "I have a flight to catch," he replied. But the words felt hollow, disconnected from the reality forming around him. Daniel watched closely, not for what the man said, but for what he did not say, for the absence of the easy explanations that innocent travelers often offered without thinking. Rex shifted slightly beside him, lifting his head just enough to track the movement, his ears forward, his body still composed, but alert in a different way now, no longer focused on the suitcase, but on the man himself. That change did not go unnoticed. Daniel felt it immediately, the subtle redirection of attention, as if Rex had already moved to the next piece of the puzzle. The officer nearest the suitcase carefully set the package back into place, closing the compartment halfway, not sealing it, but containing it, preserving the scene as it was found. Another officer stepped closer to the man, maintaining a respectful distance while ensuring there was no easy path away. "We will make sure your travel is addressed after this is resolved," the officer added, calm and firm. The man gave a small nod, but his shoulders tightened again, the calm exterior thinning further, his breath just slightly faster now, almost imperceptible unless you were looking for it. Daniel crouched once more beside Rex, his voice low, almost lost beneath the hum of the terminal. "You see him now, do you?" he murmured. Rex's gaze remained locked forward, steady, unblinking, as if confirming what Daniel already suspected. Whatever scent had drawn him in had not been contained in the suitcase alone. It had a source. The realization settled in slowly, like a weight finding its place. Daniel rose again, his eyes meeting the man's, and for a brief moment, neither spoke. There was no need. The space between them held everything that needed to be understood. Around them, the terminal continued its rhythm, distant announcements, rolling luggage, conversations resuming in cautious tones. But here, in this small circle of quiet tension, time moved differently. The officers began to guide the man away, not forcefully, but with a direction that could not be ignored, their hands visible, their presence enough to ensure compliance. As he turned, just slightly, his gaze drifted once more toward the suitcase, then toward the exit, then back again, a silent sequence of thoughts playing out behind his eyes. Rex watched every movement, not with aggression, but with a calm certainty that felt almost unsettling in its clarity. Daniel followed a step behind, the leash loose now, no tension between them, just a quiet understanding. And as they moved, Daniel realized something that stayed with him long after the moment would pass. Rex had not just found something hidden. He had chosen where to look next. And that choice had just begun to reveal a truth far larger than a single suitcase in a crowded airport. They moved through the terminal without urgency, yet nothing about the moment felt ordinary anymore, as if an invisible line had been crossed and everything on the other side carried a different weight. The officers guided the man along a side corridor just beyond the main flow of passengers, a quieter stretch where the hum of voices softened and the polished floors reflected fewer footsteps. Daniel followed closely, Rex at his side, the leash slack but purposeful, a silent connection between them that required no tension to hold. Rex's head remained slightly raised, his gaze fixed not ahead, but on the man's movements, tracking each subtle shift in posture, each breath, each pause that lingered just a fraction too long. It was not aggression. It was awareness, the kind that did not fade once the initial discovery was made. Inside the secondary screening room, the air felt cooler, more contained, the outside world reduced to muffled echoes beyond closed doors. The suitcase had already been transferred, placed carefully on a stainless steel table under brighter lights that left no shadows to hide behind. Another team stood ready, their expressions composed but sharpened by focus, each movement deliberate, each glance exchanged without words. The man was asked to sit, and he did, slowly, his hands resting on his knees, fingers interlaced just tight enough to reveal the strain beneath his controlled exterior. Daniel remained standing, just inside the room, positioned where he could see both the man and the suitcase, his attention divided but steady. Rex stepped forward once, then stopped, not approaching the table, but positioning himself where he could observe both at once, as if instinctively placing himself at the center of something still unfolding. One of the agents began documenting the Contents. Speaking quietly into a recorder, noting the structure, the hidden compartment, the uniform packages, each detail captured with precision. Another agent examined the wrapping more closely, tracing the markings, the codes, the pattern that suggested organization beyond a single individual. "This is coordinated," he said softly, almost to himself, but the words settled into the room like a quiet truth. Daniel's eyes shifted to the man, watching for a reaction, and there it was again, that flicker, that tightening at the corner of his mouth, the briefest sign that the statement had landed where it was meant to. Rex's ears twitched, his focus sharpening, not on the suitcase now, but on the man's face, as if reading something deeper than expression. Daniel took a slow breath, grounding himself, letting the moment unfold without forcing it forward. The agents continued their work, opening one of the packages carefully, revealing contents that were not immediately obvious to an untrained eye, but to those in the room, they spoke volumes, not of danger in the immediate sense, but of intention, of movement, of something designed to pass unnoticed through systems built to catch exactly this kind of thing. The man shifted in his seat, his composure thinning further, the quiet confidence he had carried earlier now replaced by something more fragile, something that could not quite hold its shape under scrutiny. "You are making this bigger than it is," he said finally, his voice lower now, less controlled, as if the words themselves were losing their footing. Daniel stepped forward just slightly, enough to bring himself into clearer view, his voice calm, steady, carrying no accusation, only certainty. "It was already bigger," he said. Rex lowered himself into a sit beside him, posture straight, eyes still fixed, not relaxed, not at ease, but settled in a way that suggested the first part of the truth had been uncovered, and the rest was only a matter of time. And in that quiet, contained space, with the world outside reduced to distant noise, it became clear that what had started as a single moment in a crowded terminal had opened into something far wider, something that would not end in this room, but had only just begun to reveal its reach. The room did not feel smaller, but it felt heavier, as if every word spoken now carried consequences that reached beyond the walls, beyond the airport, into places none of them could yet see. One of the agents carefully unwrapped a second package, slower than before, more deliberate, revealing contents that confirmed what the first had only suggested, patterns repeating with a precision that removed any doubt of coincidence. Each item was documented, photographed, logged, not just as evidence, but as pieces of something structured, something that had moved through systems undetected until now. Daniel watched in silence, his mind no longer focused on what the items were, but on what they represented: a network, a route, a series of decisions made by people who believed they would not be seen. Rex shifted slightly beside him, not restless, not impatient, but attentive in a quieter way, his head turning just enough to track the subtle changes in the room, the rising tension, the shifting energy that humans often masked with procedure. The man remained seated, but his stillness had changed. It was no longer controlled. It was held together. His fingers tightened against each other, then loosened, then tightened again, a small rhythm that betrayed the strain beneath his composed surface. "I want to speak to someone else," he said finally, his voice low, measured, but lacking the certainty it once carried. One of the agents looked up briefly, his expression neutral. "You will have that opportunity," he replied, then returned to his work without pause. The response was calm, but it closed a door the man had hoped to open. Daniel stepped slightly to the side, adjusting his position, his eyes never leaving the man's face. He had seen this before, not in the same place, not under the same lights, but in the same quiet unraveling that comes when a plan begins to fall apart without noise. Rex's ears flicked again, his gaze sharpening, not because of movement, but because of something internal, something shifting beneath the surface. Daniel felt it too, not as instinct, but as recognition. The moment was changing again. One of the agents paused over a document found within the compartment, a small folded piece of paper tucked beneath the packages, its presence almost an afterthought, easy to miss unless you were looking for what did not belong. He unfolded it carefully, scanning the contents, then looked up, his expression tightening just slightly. "These are coordinates," he said quietly. The words settled into the room with a different kind of weight, not immediate, not explosive, but expansive, reaching outward, suggesting locations, connections, movements that extended far beyond a single suitcase. Daniel's gaze shifted instantly, not to the paper, but to the man, watching for the reaction. And there it was, clearer now, the briefest widening of the eyes, the smallest break in composure, enough to confirm what Rex had sensed from the beginning. This was not isolated. This was part of something larger. Rex rose slowly to his feet, his posture calm but engaged, as if responding not to the object, but to the shift in truth itself. Daniel placed a steady hand on his back, grounding both of them in the moment. The agents continued their work, but the tone had changed. This was no longer just inspection. It was the beginning of understanding. The man lowered his gaze, no longer watching the suitcase, no longer tracking the room, as if the weight of what had been uncovered had finally settled into him. And in that quiet, with the hum of distant aircraft echoing faintly through the walls, Daniel realized that Rex had not just stopped something from passing through unnoticed. He had uncovered the first thread of something that would now have to be followed, wherever it led, no matter how far beyond this room it reached. The room settled into a quieter rhythm, not because the tension had disappeared, but because it had found its place, no longer chaotic, no longer uncertain, just present in a way that could not be ignored or undone. The agents continued documenting, their movements precise, voices low, each detail recorded with the understanding that this moment would echo far beyond the walls around them. The folded paper with coordinates lay on the table. Now, no longer hidden, its meaning expanding with every passing second as calls began to move through channels Daniel could not hear, but could feel in the shifting posture of the agents. In the way one of them stepped aside to speak into a secure line, his tone measured, urgent without panic. The man in the chair had gone quiet, not defiant, not cooperative, simply still, as if the weight of what had been uncovered had settled deeper than words could reach. His eyes no longer searched the room. They rested somewhere lower, fixed on a point that did not move, as though looking away might change nothing and looking closer might reveal too much. Daniel remained where he was, steady, present, his attention divided between the unfolding process and the quiet certainty beside him. Rex stood close, his breathing even, his posture relaxed but aware, as if the task that had driven him here was complete, yet something within him remained open, listening for what might come next. Daniel lowered his hand to rest briefly against Rex's neck, fingers pressing lightly into the thick fur, a gesture that was not for command, not for control, but for connection. "You knew," he murmured softly, not expecting a response, but receiving one in the stillness that followed, in the calm presence that needed no explanation. One of the agents approached, stopping just within Daniel's line of sight, his expression composed but carrying the quiet gravity of someone who understood the scale of what had been uncovered. "We are coordinating with federal teams," he said, his voice low. "Those coordinates match locations under active review." Daniel gave a slight nod, absorbing the information without surprise, because somewhere beneath the surface, he had already felt it, that this was not an isolated moment, not a single mistake caught by chance, but a thread pulled loose from something far larger. Rex shifted slightly, lowering himself into a calm sit once more, his gaze no longer fixed on the man, no longer scanning the room, but resting in a way that suggested closure, not of the story, but of his part in it. The man finally spoke again, his voice quieter than before, almost distant. "It was supposed to pass through," he said, not as a defense, not as an explanation, but as a statement that carried its own weight. Daniel watched him for a moment, then looked back to Rex, the meaning settling into place with a clarity that did not need words. Around them, the process continued, calls being made, reports forming, a network beginning to respond to the signal that had been uncovered here. The terminal beyond the walls carried on, planes arriving and departing, passengers moving through their journeys unaware of the moment that had just altered something unseen beneath the surface. Daniel stood there for a few seconds longer, letting the quiet settle, letting the weight of it all find its place. Then he exhaled slowly and gave Rex a small nod, a gesture that carried more meaning than any command. Rex rose without hesitation, stepping into place beside him, ready to move, ready for whatever came next, not because he understood the full scope of what had happened, but because he did not need to. As they turned to leave the room, Daniel paused just briefly at the doorway, glancing back once, not at the man, not at the suitcase, but at the space where instinct had crossed into truth. And in that moment, one thought remained, steady and unshaken. Sometimes the world is warned in quiet ways, not with sirens or alarms, but with a single decision, a single refusal to let something pass unnoticed, and the kind of loyalty that does not ask questions, only acts when it matters most.